This is the Michael Bryan Show. Hi everyone, welcome back to the show, and today I am joined with Hady Méndez, who's a best-selling author, speaker and leadership coach. She's the author of Calladita No More, which empowers readers to break silence, be more self-advocating and be more confident in the workplace as well. So we are discussing things like leadership, being able to be a manager that is more yourself, and also how to stand up for yourself and put your ideas across, whether it be how to live, how to work, and how to get the balance between those two things. So Hady, thanks so much for taking the time and joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Michael. I'm really excited to be here.
So how has leadership changed? I know it might have started off a particular way, leaders learning how to lead, but how has things shifted over time?
So that's like a really big question. I guess I'll try my best to answer it from my point of view and my lived experience. I would say that for a long time for me, leadership was about making sure that I was doing all the right things, that optically speaking, people were seeing what they were expecting of me, and that I was like checking boxes. Going through my career and looking up at other leaders, that's kind of how it was. People checking boxes and appearing a certain way. And I think what's changed is that a lot of people want to be more authentic. They want to be more real. They want to be more like bring more of their full self into the workplace. They don't want to compartmentalize the way they've had to in the past and be like, this is my work self and this is my non-work self. And it's like, I think people are just wanting to be themselves. I rather sort of am on board with that form of leadership, which is being like who you are and leaning into your superpowers. And sometimes those superpowers are a function of your identity. And I think that's perfectly fine.
Does that make me think that leaders, they're trying to find their own version of being a leader? So leaders being themselves becomes leadership in their own way.
I know that that was my experience of leadership, and mostly because it didn't feel very authentic. Lots of things that I was expected to do or like to fall in line with just didn't seem very authentic to me. They didn't line up with my lived experience or my priorities or my values. And so, a good example might be like, don't show any vulnerability. And I know you had a conversation with the recent guest about this topic. It's an important topic. That's sort of a mask, if you will, that many leaders put on. And they're like, I'm not going to show my weaknesses. I'm not going to show you that I don't know something that's going to make me look bad or that's going to make me look less strong as a leader. And what I feel is that, if you don't know something, that's cool. Find somebody on your team who does and make sure that they're assigned to work in the right roles and projects so that they can contribute in a meaningful way to getting that thing done. And P.S., you can learn more about it along the way. But I think if you surround yourself with good people, everybody brings different strengths. And I'm a big advocate for an inclusive workplace. So bring lots of different people with lots of different lived experience, with lots of different identities, and let those people be your guide. And then you don't have to know everything. And it's okay not to know everything because you're surrounded by great people. And I feel like that's my style of leadership. I think more people are subscribing to that. And I think there's tons of people who prefer to just lead the good old fashioned way, so to speak. So I don't think everybody is on board with this, but I think that a lot more people are talking about it, aware of it, and sort of maybe choosing to be like, well, maybe in some ways I am going to go in that direction. Like that makes sense, or that makes me more effective, or maybe, there's just something that they're exploring maybe or trying on and seeing how it fits.
In some ways, it's making me think that there are things that you wouldn't share in fear of this, whether it's maybe you think that people wouldn't respect you as much, maybe you think they're showing kinks and things that maybe make you seem imperfect as a leader, that they might actually have negative consequences. How do you think about in terms of sharing things, whether you know about them or not, different topics, different parts of a project? How do you think about things like sharing information, being a bit more authentic or truthful versus not?
Yeah, I'm listening to your question, and I'm gonna tell you that the vulnerability wasn't around what I knew or didn't know, because I feel like I was skilled, qualified. I feel that I was ready for the roles that I was put in, and I wasn't so much, occasionally there was, maybe something that I wasn't, maybe felt a little bit like an imposter, and I'm like, oh gosh, I don't even know how to do that. Now I'm leading a team that does this thing. That happened once in a while, but I think it was more for me personally as a Latina walking through the world. It was more like my lived experience. Like people were like, "Oh, we're gonna go golfing," and I'm like, "Should I say that this is the first time I'm going golfing?" Like I don't know, but people are gonna find out because I don't know how to golf. Or, people talked about like, "Oh, our family always goes on vacation, or we always went to Europe over the summer, or we always did this thing." And I'm like, "I never did that thing. I never even went to summer camp. Like, am I weird? What does that say about me?" So I feel like a lot of it was that, where it's just like my lived experience and how I was raised, and like people might say like, "Oh, my dad was a college professor," or my dad did this thing, and I'm like, "Oh, my dad didn't even graduate from high school." So there were things about me and my experience and my family and my background that were different from the people around me. And I had to choose, like really protect that information because I felt like people were going to judge me if I shared that information. And then it kind of came to a point where I was like, that's just a data point. That doesn't tell the whole story. It's a data point. And I'm not, I can choose to be like ashamed of it, or I can choose to lean into it because it tells more of my story. And I feel like there's so many of us, like first gen people, maybe raised in a more modest way, maybe, people that have parents that didn't graduate from college, that didn't have corporate jobs. There's a lot more of us now. And so I think a lot of us are like, well, we're kind of taking the narrative back and saying that's not a bad thing. That's just a thing. And it's just part of my story. And here's the rest of my story.
That's a very interesting point as well, because sometimes people would be deterred from saying things or even getting into a leadership position based on whether it's the status quo, whether it's the people that you surround yourself with, having different backgrounds and different ways of doing things. That can sometimes put you off if you're in air quotes too different. And then when you mention things like, worrying about being judged and maybe what they would think of you, how would you suppose people could navigate those things? Because it sounds like a web of things that some people might not even want to tackle. So how did
Yeah.
you do it, and how would you suggest others do it?
I mean, I think I had to take a long, hard look. And I will say on the outset that there were lots of people before me who started to acknowledge things like their lived experience and like being first gen or being the only Latina in a room or the only person of color in a room, or there were people before me that started to acknowledge this and say, this isn't a bad thing. This is just a thing. And like I said, here's what I'm doing now, and here's what I'm capable of, and here's my qualifications, and just, again, it's part of their narrative, but it's not the full story. I feel like I started to notice other people saying it, and then I had to kind of take a hard look and be like, I think that's me too. And I think that's been a little bit of what's been holding me back. And maybe this is why I don't connect with a lot of people, because I'm kind of not sharing a lot because I'm not really feeling good about the things that I would have to share if I had to share. And I had to kind of reframe all of that and say, sometimes limiting beliefs really hold us back. And I feel like I had to say, okay, this is not something that should be holding me back. This is part of who I am. I'm going to be proud of it. I'm going to step into it. I'm going to leverage maybe being the only Latina as a superpower. Maybe other people haven't met Latinas like me. And so I'm here to show you what it's like, and contribute in a way that really, my point of view probably is materially different. And that's a superpower. And I started to acknowledge that and say, my difference is not a weakness, but I definitely saw it that way. And I had to reframe it and say, my difference can actually be a strength. And what happens if I use it as a strength? What would that mean for me? I don't know if you know this, Michael. I don't know if people talk about this, but some people are afraid of being successful. Like that really is a scary proposition. And I had to overcome that fear and just say, like, I'm going to step into this. I'm going to own it, and I'm going to see where it takes me. And if it works, then I'm going to share with the other people. And so that's really has become my life's work, to share the things that help me or that work for me with other people.
What was your first time like in terms of putting your head above the noise, showing up as someone that maybe was a little bit different from everybody else in the room? What was your first one like where you stood up for yourself, maybe for your points of view, for your expertise? What was it like?
Yeah, I would say it's super gradual. So I had to do a lot of listening and observing because I was horrified to speak up. I was horrified to use my voice. I really thought that I would be shut down, that I wouldn't be listened to, that I would be dismissed or ignored. And that's scary. And I had some data to kind of support that, because I kind of remember, a few times when I did try to share or did, maybe disagree with someone, it didn't go so well. And so I had to kind of take a step back, observe, notice, and see, the people that were respected, and notice that I didn't say liked, but the people that were respected, I had to notice what they were doing, because that was kind of the lane I wanted to be. And I'm like, yeah, everybody might like me, but if people don't respect me, I'm not getting anywhere. So I got to be respected. So I had to notice what they were doing. And, sometimes they would just ask questions and say, I heard you say this, say more about that. And it's not like I'm not disagreeing with you. I just want to understand it better. And so there were like different techniques and ways to be part of the conversation without necessarily disagreeing or like even putting my point of view out there. But eventually I had to get to that point. Like that was the goal. The goal was to be like, my point of view is completely different, and I actually think I'm right. And I actually think it's a better solution. So what about this? But I didn't start there. I couldn't start there. That was not really realistic. I needed to start sort of slowly and maybe in more low risk situations and work my way up to higher risk, higher profile situations. And I have the sort of added complexity that, culturally speaking, as a Latina, we are we respect elders and we respect people in authority very much, almost to the point where it's frowned upon to disagree, or or to disagree or challenge someone who's more senior or more or older than you. And so I had to, again, shed something that wasn't really working for me. That's maybe that's the way I grew up, and whatever that worked in a family setting, and maybe it didn't work, but like that was my situation growing up. And like I needed to now learn a whole new set of skills to navigate the workplace and to be successful and thrive in the workplace. And that required me, like I said, shedding some beliefs, acquiring new skills, and then being very brave. And, sometimes getting shot down and then kind of reassembling and getting myself back together and going back in and saying, okay, I'm going to try that again because that didn't work last time, but maybe it's going to work this time. And sometimes it's a function of who's on the receiving end. Some people are really kind and generous, and they're cool. Like they appreciate when someone who maybe is junior to them challenges them. They're like, oh, say, yeah, I like that idea. Tell me more about that, Hady. But I'm not going to say that I found a lot of people like that, but I found some people like that. And boy, I appreciated that because they made it a little bit easier for me. But I didn't always have people like that I worked for. And sometimes, people called me disruptive, or, said that, I was a little bit too aggressive, or, I even got accused of not bringing up things and not advocating for myself. And it's like, well, I didn't know you wanted to get promoted, or I didn't know you were looking for a raise. You never said anything. And then, I'm just kind of sitting there and be like, oh my gosh, like, how did this happen? How did I get here? Like, I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't. And so that's a reality, I think, for everybody. I think every individual is responsible for figuring out how to reframe things so that they can advocate for themselves and they can show up more fully and they can use their voice and take up space at work, because that's what companies are looking for. That's what organizations want, is people who are going to contribute. That's why you were hired. Right? Like that, if you think about it, that's why people brought you to the table, is because you bring something to it. So you holding back is doing everybody a disservice.
That's a very good way of looking at it as well, Hady, because if you think about sometimes the way that you're brought up, or the fact that maybe you just notice things about the situation that you're in, becomes the reason why you're struggling. Because as you said, they're hiring you, they want you to show up and share the perspectives, share the
That's
points of
right.
view. And if you're not doing that for whatever reason, that's the thing that could, in theory, cause you to have to move on or cause them to let you go or whatever that happens to be. You can end
Or
up in
just
a,
like retire in place type of thing. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like there are
yeah.
people that like you could just, I guess, do that in perpetuity or like a version of that. But you're not gonna grow. You're not gonna expand your presence, and you're not gonna be visible, and you're not gonna be really valued and appreciated and celebrated if you're not really contributing and showing up fully.
That's it. It can feel quite strange, I guess, when you sit there in a meeting and you realise, oh, actually, the way that I think is what's causing it to go stale or quiet, or you just kind of
Hmm.
sat there nodding rather than contributing. That must be
Hmm.
a strange feeling to realise that, oh, actually, what I thought was helping me, or perhaps that was helping me, now no
Yes.
longer is.
Yeah, there's like this thing, and I'm gonna not talk about it too much because I don't like know it all, but I know enough to like just share a little bit. There's people who they move from being a pet, meaning like everybody likes them and they're the favorite person, to being a threat. And how that happens is you people maybe at some point enjoy the contributions you make, and then at some point they start feeling threatened by the contributions you're making, and then the behavior towards you can be quite different. And that is an experience that a lot of women of color have shared. That has been their experience, and it has been mine from time to time too. So that's just like sort of another thing where like you're finally brave enough to contribute. You're finally brave enough to show up. You're finally saying, yes, I feel, this is how I feel. And these are the things I want to share. And this is what I think can make the product better or serve our customer, give them a better experience or whatever the case might be. And then it could be all of a sudden you notice that you're treated a little bit differently because people start to feel threatened by your presence. And that happens too. And so I just wanted to like also share that aspect because it's very complicated and it's very messy and it's not linear. It's not just like you figure it out and now everything works the way it's supposed to. Sometimes you figure it out and then there's a different kind of problem that you come up against. And then you got to sort of learn how to navigate that. That's been my reality. And when I think about leadership, I think it's a lot about pivoting, about reading the room, about learning and growing, and about it's like recalibrating. It's like, okay, like what am I supposed to be paying attention to now? What is going to make me a better leader now? Like maybe that changed. I mean, you could even think about like in this moment that we find ourselves in and how big AI has become, and it's all anybody ever talks about, and it's driving all of these business decisions, and it's affecting people's livelihood and ability to work, and how if you're a manager that's like not talking about that or not acknowledging that or not taking it into consideration, then you're kind of like a little bit behind. That's not gonna, you're probably missing some things. And so I think the act of recalibrating is really important in leadership.
What I'd be curious about as well is, I mean, it's a weird idea where you're trying to contribute and possibly shifting your own mental state, mindset to be able to be okay with that. What if other people are doing the same thing? So obviously you're not the only one in the room. There are other people all trying to, in some ways, grow as a person. How
Uh-huh.
about that little dilemma where maybe everyone is trying to say something because they're used to being quiet and everyone's having this own battle inside their own heads as well? What happens then? Like, it sounds a bit strange to ask it, but if you're in a room with, I don't know, four people that are normally
Uh-huh.
quiet and you're all, if I feel like you're all just trying to get a word in.
Yeah, I think by and large that makes for a good team. And I think then you have that's a good problem to have because you have people who want to participate, who want to share their point of view, who are very invested, who are, want to be part of the conversation. And so I think, I don't really think that's a problem. I think it's like have a longer meeting or have maybe some guidelines around how long everybody can talk, but get everybody's get everybody's like point of view and give everybody some space to contribute. I think that's a good problem to have, and probably is going to make for more innovative solutions, richer outcomes, better experiences for customers, etc. So I don't think that's a problem.
So how would you suppose if there were challenges? Because if things go well, then things go well. But what about challenges that might occur? And how would you suppose someone that has these extra things going on that they're trying to improve on handle challenges that occur in the workplace as well?
And that has happened to me, and I know it happens because for a variety of reasons. And, we can not talk about things like, the relationships between men and women in the workplace, and, how people assume certain roles, or there's stereotypes, there's bias, there's so much at play every single day in every single space that we occupy. So that does play a role. And sometimes I have had it happen to me where I'm shushed and told, like, when we didn't ask anybody's opinion yet, and then someone else gives their opinion, and maybe it's a male, and it's like, oh, that's a great idea. That has completely happened to me. And we have to learn to navigate through that, because it can happen, and more likely than not, it will happen. And so, you need to assert yourself. You need to say, Bill, that's exactly what I said 5 minutes ago. I'm glad you agreed with me. I'll go ahead and add to that. Let me go ahead and add the rest of what I was thinking about this topic. You could do that. You could also be an ally to someone in the room. So if you see that happen to someone else, and it doesn't matter if you're male or female or queer or straight, it doesn't matter what your identity is. If you see this happening to anyone else in the room, you can advocate for them, or you can make sure that their voice is being heard. So if someone who is trying to speak up it feels like they're getting silenced or they're getting dismissed, you can say, hey, that's what Hady said. I heard Hady say that before, or that's a great idea, and it sounded like you're building on Hady's contribution from earlier. So there is a way for you to, serve as someone who, if you've seen the person make the contribution, the original person make the contribution, by all means, you can be the person to acknowledge it, and then sort of like say, okay, now that the two of us think this is a great idea, let's keep moving with this. This sounds like there's possibility here. So I think there's an opportunity to do that. I think especially if you are a leader, you should be very aware of how you engage with your team members. So I'll give you an example. I used to go to these sales calls, and it was like all of us from the sales team we were like a customer team, and whoever was assigned to this customer, regardless of their role, was required to come to the meeting, because we were going to do like a brainstorming session to see, like, hey, this deal is not getting closed. What are we going to do? What's the best way forward? Who's going to have the conversation with whom, and come up with a game plan. And I would prepare a lot for those meetings, and I would always like give my ideas. I would always make sure I had at least one or two things to contribute. And I remember this one meeting where I gave my idea, and everyone was like, yeah. And then we just kind of kept going around the room with other ideas. And then the senior leader, who was a white man, said, I want to go back to Hady's idea. I actually think that was a good idea. Now that I've heard everyone's idea, I actually think Hady's idea was the best one. So let's work on that one. Let's start there. And I had and then we did, and then everybody thought it was a good idea. P.S. Everybody changed their mind and said, yes, that's a great idea. And then we went forward with that idea. And then after the meeting, I reached out to the manager and I said, thank you for crediting me with my idea, and for, I guess, giving me a little recognition in the meeting, a little visibility for the solution that I had proposed. And I appreciate that, so my voice isn't always heard in some of these crowded rooms. And I appreciate you hearing it and acknowledging it. And he said, yeah, I'm happy to do that. And then he always did. And I feel like when someone does something like that, I make sure that I thank them, because even though he has the most power in that room, he still didn't have to do that. He could have said it was his idea, and everyone would have liked it anyway. So I really appreciated what he did. And I felt like that was he demonstrated to me the sign of being a good leader in a lot of ways through that particular situation. And I make sure that I thank people when they do that.
It's interesting that you mention that because if someone has, let's just say the most power in the room, usually they're like a higher up leader in the hierarchy, so to speak.
Hmm.
And I find their job is potentially more complicated because there's so many other voices in the room. They're all trying to
Hmm.
have a say. It's almost like your job is infinitely more complicated because you're trying to make sure everyone has a say, equal
Hmm.
say. That's obviously them doing their job. It's so complicated to navigate all of that and then potentially the consequences of that.
And to check yourself for any biases that you might be bringing into that conversation. Like as an example, in that particular company, he did have better relationships with a lot of people in that room for probably a variety of reasons. But one of the reasons was because a lot of people have worked at that company for a long time, and I was like newer, new or newish, I would say. Maybe at the time I was like maybe a year and a half in, and he had relationships with people in that room for like 5+ years. So, there's already a lot of bias from that. She's the new girl. What does she know? Or she hasn't been doing this for very long, or whatever the case might be. Even that narrative would work against me. But like, that doesn't mean you don't give the idea. That means, you make sure your idea is a good one so that there's a chance for it to be heard through the noise.
It's almost like it's a meritocracy in the way that it works. How does it fit in when you don't know if your idea is good? There are other voices in the room. It would likely need to be pretty good to be spoken about after everyone's shared their ideas. How does that fit in with, you mentioned before, like maybe if it wasn't that great, maybe I need to rethink my idea before I put it to the
Hmm.
table.
Hmm.
If you take everything else out of it, it gets a little bit simpler. But then if your idea is good, some people are with it and for it, and yet someone might hold the barrier up and say, because of XYZ, we're not going to take it any further, even if it's a good idea. So
Hmm.
how would you know?
I mean, you don't know, I guess is the answer. You can have a gut, and I definitely follow my gut. I never expected my ideas to always be used or utilized. I knew going into it that, there was like, I don't know, probably less than 10% chance that my idea would go through because there was lots of experienced people, lots of people that were more experienced than me. So that's the reality is you have a room full of like amazing people coming together. So all the ideas are probably good and some of them are like the best ideas. That's like level setting. Just like understand that it's not that your idea is bad, but like there was better ideas and I understood that. But what I would say I did is the role that I was in, I would describe myself as the main customer contact. And I used that as a leverage point. And I'm like, I don't know if everybody knows this, but I had a private conversation with the customer about X, Y, and Z. And I learned this fact. Or at the last meeting that we were in, I heard them say this thing. And when I asked about it, they revealed this other thing. And therefore, so I would try to bring things to the conversation that no one else knew about. And that oftentimes meant challenging assumptions because there's a lot of assumptions that go into these conversations. It's like, well, they're definitely buying and they definitely have to make a decision in the next 30 days. And, it's going to be a centralized solution. Like we're assuming a lot of things about the deal. And sometimes that's not true. Sometimes it's like, oh, well, actually, there's a new CIO in town, and that person prefers this type of solution, or that person is going to give everybody an opportunity. Every business now gets to pick their own solution, or, whatever the thing is. And sometimes this is stuff that is, I don't want to say it's not public, but not everybody has heard about it. So I try to arm myself with information that I think everybody didn't know. And I would say, here's what I heard, or here's what I felt like was implied. Therefore, that's why my point of view is a little bit different. And so sometimes that was really good. And then like they'd be like, okay, so now tell us what did you hear? What was that conversation? Who did you have it with? When was this call? And then people are like, oh, okay, now they're second guessing themselves. And so that's what that was my value, was that I had very close proximity to the customer in that particular situation. So I had to bring information that no one else had to that meeting.
In your experience, then, what do you think stops people from speaking up? We talked about a lot earlier in terms of like their upbringing, their culture, the beliefs that they have. Maybe it's just a baseline level of confidence, or maybe they're just a little bit on the quiet side as well, Hady, where they're just not as loud as some of the other voices in the room, but maybe there's more to it. So what would you say were the common things? And we'll get to how to handle those and improve those as well.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of what you said. So it's cult it can be cultural expectations or even gender expectations. It can be personality, like I'm an introvert, I'm an extrovert type of vibe. It can even be what people are comfortable with. So it's like this being confrontational. And that's how when people think about advocating for themselves, they think of that as being confrontational. I don't. I think advocating for yourself is just that, is you're just like stating what you need. I don't think that's being adversarial, but some people do feel that that's what it represents. And they're very uncomfortable with that. They're like, oh no, I don't do that. I'm not confrontational. And it's like, well, okay, well, then you're going to be at a disadvantage. You will not get all the things that you're probably deserving of if you don't ask for it and if you're not clear about it and if you're not following up and circling back with people often. So that's the opportunity cost, if you will, is you're going to miss out on stuff like that. But in the end, I don't know if my case is super common, but I think my case is certainly common for certain groups. And that's that I just did not have the skill. I was willing to do it. I just didn't know how to do it. And when I tried to like just, do it, I wasn't doing it very well. Like it was probably coming across confrontational. So I had to learn how to do it sort of gracefully and make it more of a conversation. And it's like, hey, I'm not sure if you're aware that, my goal is to be the leader of this team. And so I wanted to chat with you about what it's going to take for that to happen. What's a reasonable timeline, what I should be working on, et cetera. So that's me self-advocating for myself. And it's not confrontational. It's more like we're building a partnership or a collaboration and I'm getting someone to invest in me. And that's very different. But I had to learn how to do it that way as opposed to be like, hey, why didn't I get promoted? It's like, well, let me make sure that I'm letting you know that is my expectation and here's why and here's my long-term goal. It took reframing for me and to learn the skill. And I think a lot of people need to get comfortable advocating for themselves, like I said earlier, in lower risk situations so that when there's more at stake, they already have the competency and the skill to do it.
What would you say were some of the main things that they could work on? Is it simply just practice and getting used to it and comfortable, or there were some skills that maybe they could learn?
Well, we've talked about a couple things like shedding limiting beliefs. I think, sometimes we have this voice in our head that is lying to us. So we got to like shut that down and just, really build our confidence and sort of move forward, assuming best intentions with everyone involved and really, um, yeah, reframing things. I think there's a lot of reframing that needs to happen. You do need to learn a new skill set because advocating for yourself is the average person. I mean, there are some children that grow up advocating for themselves. They're like, Mommy, I want to eat potato chips today. And here's why I didn't eat potato chips yesterday. And I really like but I didn't grow up in a household like that. I don't know if you did, Michael. So if you didn't learn that skill growing up, then you got to learn it at some point. And so I learned it on the job. I learned it as a professional, which was obviously too late or very late, but I found my way. So I got a late start, but I was able to learn the skill and eventually put it to work for myself. I would say, get into the habit of meeting with your manager and having conversations about your career with your manager. That's how you advocate for yourself. And that's something everyone can do. And many people have one-on-ones with their managers already. And I'm not really sure what people talk about. Probably lots of people are talking about like assignments and projects and, when things are going to get done. But that's a perfect opportunity to talk about your growth, your ambitions, what you're hoping for, and whether if there's things that you need help with or that in the opinion of your manager, hey, how do you're not ready for promotion because you've never supervised other people or you've never managed $1 million project or you've never done this thing, then it's like, well, how can I get there? Because this is what I want and I need your help in getting to that point. And I feel like those are the conversations and those are some of the ways people can begin their journey to self-advocacy and really showing up for themselves at work.
I like the idea of actually organizing the conversation. So it seems
Hmm.
very different versus you're in a meeting with 10 other managers and you're trying to find a way of navigating that. Maybe organizing a meeting with them on a one-to-one basis or
Hmm.
something similar would just help it feel a bit more conversational and a bit more almost like negotiating rather than scream above the noise and hope people listen.
Yeah, because I think that a lot of us make the mistake to think that isn't it obvious I want to get promoted? Isn't it obvious that I want to grow in my career? Isn't it obvious that would love if the company paid for more professional development? Aren't all these things obvious? And it's like people can't read your mind. So you're gonna have to be pretty direct about what it is that you're expecting and wanting and hoping for. And you need to be, and that is going to require some clarity on the part of the employees. So like maybe everybody doesn't want to be the manager of the team. Maybe, you're busy with other things. You have other priorities in your life, and that's okay. And you can have that conversation too and say, I'm really happy in my role. I love it here. I love the company. I love my, flexibility that I can work from home or that I can be home, 3 days out of the week, or I have a flexible schedule so I can spend time with my family. And if that is what you want and that's your aspiration, share that too. I feel like everybody doesn't have to. And I think like if I'm reading right, a lot of Gen Zers don't have the aspiration to be like, get promoted, get promoted, get promoted, because they know that there's a lot of you give up a lot when that happens. And so if that is something you want, or whatever it is that you want, get clear on it and then get your manager to support you. Like I had a situation where I couldn't work from home and I had to work with my manager and say, and this was pre-COVID, I was like, you know what? I really want to work from home on Friday. What would it take to do that? Like, how can we make that happen? And it was like a long conversation. We were like 6 months into that conversation because, they were worried about what other employees might think, and they were worried about me getting my work done, and they were worried about, my conversations with customers and, whatever. So I said, okay, tell me all your concerns and let's get through them. And I finally got to the point where I was working, home on Fridays, because that was something that was important to me. So it doesn't have to be because I've used, this notion of promotion a lot. And I just want people to know that you can advocate for whatever you want. Promotion is one thing, flexibility is another great thing. Um, it can be whatever you want or need. So I just wanted to kind of put a little star or a little asterisk there to make sure that everybody feels seen in today's conversation.
How about some of the other things? So we looked at skill set, we've looked at negotiating, we've looked at speaking with your manager in terms of trying to get some of the things that you need to be able to do your job effectively. But how about some of the other areas? I'm thinking like the limiting beliefs, the cultural norms that you grew up with. How do you suppose we can handle those?
That's such a good question, and I love it because I think your question is like a lot of the work I do, and so I'll kind of spell it out in a couple of ways. One is I'm an author, and I wrote a book, Calladita No More: My Latina Journey and the Lessons That Shaped Me, and I wrote it for people, especially women of color and Latinas, who are looking to show up in a different way and not be silent, and are looking to take up space and own their narrative and not ask for permission. So there's great resources out there. That's one. And they're written by people that oftentimes share your identity or have a very similar lived experience. Number two, and this is work that I do also, and that I did a lot in the past, is there are these things called employee resource groups at work. And employee resource groups, or ERGs, they're like clubs that are shaped around shared identity. And those can be great spaces to have conversations like these because, it's like where the rubber meets the road. It's like, this is how we grew up. This is like how our family is. This is the expectations we have. And it's like, well, we're going to have to challenge that. So not all of that is working. And we're going to have to find ways to challenge it. And it's good to be around other people like you that can, you can have a good, rich conversation about those things together. And maybe, like you said, rewrite the rules together. And I know of so many people that offer workshops, coaching, talks, all the things around topics like this, because this is something that a lot of people struggle with. This is not a new thing. And this is not a thing that people should feel like they're navigating alone. There's so many people who are, have challenges navigating the workplace for a variety of reasons. First gen, only in the room, and a whole lot of other things. And then I would say the third thing is if you don't have an employee resource group at work, there are lots of identity-based organizations and networking groups that you can participate in. And I participate in a lot of them, but the one that I'll mention here is Lean in Latinas. So I'm a Latina and I'm part of Lean in Latinas. It's an organization that helps Latinas as they navigate their career journey. And we're challenging a lot of these myths and these cultural norms that are not working. And we're talking about it quite directly and saying like, hey, we need to take care of ourselves. We need to prioritize our wellness. We need to make sure that we're speaking up and advocating for ourselves. We need to make sure that we are bringing others along with us, that we're using our platform and our influence to bring up other people in our community. So if you don't have an employee resource group in the workplace, join an organization like Latina Latinas. It's actually free. It's free to join. And there's circles, which are like little, I would guess, call them communities that are based on lots of different things. So as an example, I run the circle where I co-lead the circle for Bookish Latinas. As an author, I decided that I would start a circle for anybody who like loves books or writes books or reads books or illustrates books or edits books or whatever the case might be. And we're having conversations about like, hey, how do we get more of our manuscripts out there? How do we get more of our stories there? How do we amplify the stories that are out there that are not being heard, that are not being read, that are not getting visibility? So every little community is doing some type of work to challenge these cultural norms that are just not working. And so I would say there's lots of opportunities for people to either do it on their own or to do it in community or to do it, alone and in community.
I'd be really curious as well about how these groups would work. So you come in, I'm assuming you sit down and have a chat about some of the things that you're struggling with. How do you suppose the barriers get broken down? By being in the room, you are acknowledging that you need to change something in some way. How do you suppose these things actually get changed?
I can see sort of two things, two answers to your question. One is some people are not even aware that they have bias or that they have limiting beliefs. And that's real. So you don't even know it. It's only when you're like talking about it with other people and they're like, Bahari, you could have a family and be a manager. And it's like, oh, and like sometimes you don't even know that you have these limiting beliefs. So I would say that only when you're in community and you start hearing other people talk, do you realize that maybe you do have a limiting belief, or maybe it's something that all of you share. Like, as an example, my book is called Calladita No More, and it's sort of a response to a cultural saying that is Calladita te ves más bonita. In English, that translates to you look prettier when you're quiet, and it's gendered for females. And a lot of us know that that is something that we reject. I would say like that we're more aware that we're like, that's not us. We reject that. We're not prettier when we're quiet. We're not going to remain silent. We are going to use our voice. We are going to take up space. So I feel like that is an example of one that we all universally reject and are like, yeah, we're not doing that. But there are some that are a little bit more subtle that we might not be as cognizant of or aware of. And just like we just do it because it's the way we've always done it. And so that gives us an opportunity to learn and hear other people's point of view or how they've handled it. And I'm gonna tell you the truth, Michael, sometimes you feel like you're the only one. That's the thing that's what makes these situations so complicated, is that I spent a lot of time in corporate thinking I was the only one that felt the way I felt because I hadn't met a lot of other Latinas that were in financial services and tech doing the type of work I was doing. And it's not until, now I'm like 30 years, since I first entered the workforce, that there's a good volume of Latinas that are in the workplace doing a variety, like many, many things. We're in all the places and all the spaces. And now is when I can have a really rich conversation and say, yeah, you don't even know what it was like when I started. Here's what it felt like. And here's what I had to do. And here's how I dealt with that. And now there's so many more of us and there's so many different experiences. And a lot of us are more aware. We've this conversation about self-care, we weren't talking about that in the 80s. That wasn't a thing. I think the closest maybe we came to was work-life balance. And now, um, self-care is a priority. People, make it a point to breathe, to take breaks, to make sure they're going for a walk and getting fresh air, to, sit with their dogs, spend time with their family. That was, you know, some people frowned upon that when I entered the workplace. That was not a thing you talked about. And that was certainly not a thing you talked about out loud in public spaces to say like, "Oh, I really just want to read a book." And it's like, you're here to work. Go to your desk and work, please. So it's really different now. It's really different now. And I think we should, that's another thing about the moment. This is the moment where we're having more of these conversations. And so, what a moment to be in the workplace, and what a moment to embrace doing things a little bit differently and viewing things a little bit differently, because there's so many more people talking about it and making the changes and living it. They're living the things that they want. Yeah, they're actually changing their behavior and their approach based on their values and things that matter to them. And that is not something that we were always doing in the workplace. It didn't feel like it was an option.
No, that's a very, very interesting point because it's also a world where you're monitored a lot. Like a lot of it's about how productive are you, how are you spending your time. You've got whether it's key performance indicators or something along those lines where you're being monitored and results based and checked and rechecked, I guess. How do you suppose these things that we've spoken about today are impacting those? So do you have any words of wisdom for those that are listening? Do you have any sense of, okay, yes, you can look after yourself because it actually makes you more productive in these areas, in this area, right?
Yeah, 1,000%.
So it becomes more, okay, we do this, and it does actually translate to a better working environment, which then leads to other benefits as well.
I mean, it doesn't translate one to one for sure. So, but I would say that it is important to have boundaries. I remember when I was doing customer facing work, I had to put in time on my calendar to have meals, to take a break, and to use the bathroom. And I learned that over time because I had a lot of back to back meetings, and I wasn't my best self when I was hungry or tired or needing a bio break. Like I'm not my best self if I'm not like ready for the meeting in all the ways that I need to be. So that's I think a good example of you have boundaries that help you to show up better and more fully the next time you enter a room, whether it's with a customer or with internal partners. And I feel like, that's why I built it into, and I had a conversation with my manager about it. I'm like, I'm noticing this and it's really not good. And here's what I'm planning to do about it. And they were supportive and they said, yeah, that sounds like a good plan. You should go ahead and do that. And everybody had the ability to decide for themselves what would work for them. And I like that too, because, what works for me might not work for you. But I would say, generally speaking, have boundaries, have good prioritization practices. So, like, prioritize what needs to be done. You can't do everything. You might set out to do, 10 things today, and you might only get to do two of them. So make sure that you're doing the two things you need to be doing. I got good at that over time. I was not born being good at all those things, but I got good at time management, creating boundaries for myself, prioritizing things, knowing when to include my manager. So it's like when to let them know that, hey, here's a situation that I'm struggling with. And I just wanted to let you know. Oftentimes, that's how I would frame it. I'm like, I don't need your help yet, but I wanted to make you aware that I'm struggling with this thing. Here's how I'm going to approach it, and I'll get back to you. And it was just like, heads up. I'm just letting you know. For me, I like doing that because I didn't want to like kind of go through it myself. And also, if like 10 other people were going through it, then maybe it's good for the manager or team leader to know that. And so I'm always one of those people that it's like, I rather err on the side of being over communicative and just say, hey, I don't know if you realize that thing you said was just going to take us an extra 10 minutes is actually taking all of us about 3 extra hours every day. And it's like, are we sure that we still want to do that? Is it adding enough value that it's worth 3 hours of everybody's time? And, some people won't speak up and say anything. And so what I'm describing is self-advocating. I'm going in and I'm saying, listen, I think 3 hours is a lot of time to spend on that activity. I don't think it's worth it, but I want you to know that that's what's happening. You decide, if you think it's worth it, and I'll do it. But I'm letting you know that, here's the reality of the situation. And so, sometimes that's a good role to play because managers, I definitely had managers who would come to me and be like, hey, could you tell me how's it working out? Because they know that I was going to be honest about it. That's my MO. If you're not that person, if you're not the person who's like kind of the squeaky wheel, I think there is some advantage to being the squeaky wheel. If you lean or have a propensity to being that way, it can actually be quite advantageous to, be that person and that people check in with and that people go to for like real talk. There could be a lot of upside for that.
Well, that's a very, very good way to round off there, Hady. I think that's important as well, of being able to realise that maybe you are the squeaky wheel, but other people need to acknowledge the fact that things might need to change so that you can, what would the phrase, unsqueak, I guess.
Well, yeah, other people are complaining, but you're the only one saying something. And I'm of the school of thought that it's like, I'm not just going to complain about it to my coworkers. I'm actually going to make my manager aware of it. 9 times out of 10, I'll propose something better. So that's the way that I choose to show up.
So how can people grab this book then? How can they find it? Give people the chance to find you as well. How could they find out more about you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm pretty active there under my name, Hady Méndez. I'm a content creator. I have 2 shows on LinkedIn every week. And then my book is called Calladita No More. You can find it on my website, which is calladitanomore.com. If you're looking to bring either the idea of self-advocacy or the book in the form of a book club or any other format, hit me up. That's really why I created the book, so I could spread the message and really scale it and get the message out there.
Thanks so much for being a guest on the show. Those that are listening, feel free to subscribe, share the show, tell others, and also leave a review wherever you are listening into your podcasts. Hady, I've enjoyed this. It's been great. I look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.